So tonight I'm going to be talking about financial issues for couples impacted by ADHD. And I'm Melissa Orlov, and I specialize. I'm a marriage consultant. I specialize in working with couples impacted by ADHD. And I briefly touch on financial topics in my couples seminar. And I have to say, I hear a lot of feedback on financial issues. So I know there are many of them. So what I was hoping tonight was to actually have a conversation with Rick. When we got going to talk about this topic, we went back and forth, and it was actually a lot of fun. And I think he has a lot of experience in this realm also in terms of what's going on. But there are a few things that just let me cover right up front, and then Rick, we can do some riffing back and forth on sort of how these things show up for people. There are a lot of issues, financial issues that couples do face that ADHD impacts, largely around staying employed and being organized, and also financial planning stuff. And so there are things that come through in terms of like billing and paperwork for people who are lawyers or entrepreneurs or whatever, who run their own businesses and then have difficulty engaging with billing, or difficulty with organizing. I've worked with people who've been fired not because they weren't good at the job in general, but because they couldn't finish the paperwork that was the follow-up to the job. There are issues in couples that couples argue over about planning, which has to do for planning for the future and retirement and et cetera, which can be very stressful. That has to do with the looking forward and doing something that is good for you in the long term, but which hurts right now, which is not always easy for people who have ADHD. And it's very frustrating also for their partners to not be able to engage around those conversations. And then there are just some straight employment issues. Particularly, I find that brings a lot of issues for couples when the man is the one who has ADHD and has difficulty holding his job, and the woman perhaps didn't always expect to be the sole breadwinner. And that brings up some issues that come from the family of origin and expectations and et cetera. Rick, when you and I were talking originally, we had been talking about some of the issues around sort of what I call serial entrepreneurship, and billing and paperwork and whatever. Do you want to talk a little bit about what your experiences were with some of that?
Sure, sure. And I guess I would consider myself that. When we first got married, I, went out and got a job. I had a job, but, I worked on it a little bit harder. But wasn't too long after that I decided to, well, it was a long time ago, and there was a recession that happened. And I was selling boats at that time with my cousin who had a yacht brokerage, and he couldn't floor the boats anymore because prime rate was 18% or something. So I said, well, if I can sell boats, I can sell real estate. So I stepped into real estate with no salary, no nothing. Found out my wife was pregnant 2 weeks later, and I had very little reserves because part of the ADHD thing, it's now or not now. So it makes us kind of fearless sometimes because we're just oblivious to what could be happening. So I really didn't have anything. And it took me 8.5 months before I sold my first house. So we had to figure out how to survive during that time. So I know that was challenging. And since then, well, very shortly after that, I realized I wasn't very good at negotiating with buyers and sellers. So I figured out how to just buy the listings instead of negotiating because it was so much easier and it made my sellers happier. So I found out it didn't take much money, if any, sometimes. So that was my step into entrepreneurship. And it just kept going from there, mostly in the real estate world, real estate lending and development, that sort of thing. But the money was a real roller coaster, and I was pretty ambitious on that. And I guess the biggest issue we had was I wanted to get my kids into the right zip code for the school district because, education is determined by zip code. So we really stretched to be in a good zip code. And we had this huge nut to crack every month as far as payments goes. That was really challenging.
And that puts a lot of pressure onto a relationship. You're doing it for all the right reasons. You have a lot of faith in yourself. And I think One of the good things, I think, well, not to be judgmental, but one of the very positive aspects of ADHD is many people with ADHD have the kind of fearlessness that you talk about that needs to be part of being an entrepreneur. You have to have a great idea, something, and then want to be able to follow through on it. What I observe, not only is what you're mentioning, which is in your case, you have a roller coaster of financial stuff, and you didn't really have any kind of cushion to work with that, and that puts a lot of pressure on the partners, which it sounds like you were aware of it. But I've for example worked with a lawyer at one point who was he was working. He didn't have trouble finding clients, but his billing sometimes was 6 or 12 months behind. And at some point, his wife was saying, "We have all these bills, and what do we do now? I need you to do the billing." And he'd say, "I would, I will, I will," and then he couldn't get to it. The obvious solution for that particular issue was for him to hire somebody to do the bookkeeping on a part-time basis, where he could hand off the billing, get a system in place, and have the bookkeeper bring it in, which I think eventually he did. But he was afraid to do that and kind of too busy to do it, and he wasn't sure. And if you miss one bill, if one bill isn't able to be paid because it's too late or whatever, there's some contention around it, that pays for the bookkeeper. So sometimes delegating the financial responsibilities is a very useful strategy. And this is even true when you're doing basic home bills and stuff. If you can put things on auto pay, that's a form of delegation, to be able to not have to think about them and engage with them quite so much. So the paperwork organizational side of things can be sometimes delegated, and I believe it should be. As much as possible, if that seems to be the best solution to both partners. So, one of the things that I run into quite a lot. Let me before I do that, let's talk about this planning for the future thing, Rick. So you mentioned your experience with not having saved up a whole lot for the future. You want to riff on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think it was like, I think you mentioned bravery or whatever. It was not bravery because I was aware of things. It was bravery because I was completely oblivious to things, right? You don't know what you're wading into. But even after I got smacked a couple of times and learned some lessons, they promptly went out the window when the next exciting thing came along, which was, another house. It was almost like an addiction to me in the beginning. We had like, I don't know, 35 properties or something like that. And I was having trouble paying bills, and some, recessions come and that sort of thing. And I found myself, not paying half the mortgages one month and then paying the other half. And the next month I would catch the first half up and going back and forth. So you actually can get pretty far behind without even, it's like you get used to it. It's like landscape. Some people would be horrified that they're missing their mortgage payment, but I just got used to it, right? It's like, how close to the line can you get? And so I know a lot more about that now. And I realize that I wouldn't classify it as an addiction exactly, but I was practically addicted to that kind of behavior. I knew I should be saving money, but I couldn't justify, well, why would I keep $10,000 in the bank when I could buy another property for that?
Yeah.
Why would I do that?
And so there's a very interesting neurological thing going on there, which is ADHD is about low levels of dopamine. Dopamine is part of the reward system. And so when you bought those houses, you got those hits of dopamine. It felt very rewarding to you. It's the same, that reward system is the same one that does deal with addictions and et cetera. So you were if you think of the ADHD brain as a reward focused brain, you were actually seeking the reward. It felt good to you. That's what you really wanted to engage in. And the saving is the opposite. The saving is pain right now. I can't get that reward. I have to put that reward aside. And the payout is like, 25 years down the road or something. It is completely in the not now. And that's something, as you're thinking about the way that you integrate yourself with your financial issues, it's really something to be aware of. How much is this reward focused element of ADHD actually getting in my way, even if it feels good. If your partner is saying to you, stop, you gotta, don't do this, there is an impact beyond just the reward feeling right there on your relationship.
I might add, there's another element of ADHD, which is a huge plus, but it's also an insidious negative. I think very often we develop really good soft skills. When we're in grammar school, we don't fit in. We have to learn how to read subtext. I think we get very good at that in order to survive. Um, so yeah, I did have a partner back then. My partner was totally oblivious because I didn't show up to our little meetings scared, worried about it. I was excited. We just got another property. Everything is going absolutely great. So that set of soft skills I had, and it was honest. I honestly didn't see the negatives that were going on.
Yeah.
But if I wasn't quite as good at that, he would have crunched the numbers a little bit better and say, here's big risk factors here and there. So I think that's a big part of it too. I got a dopamine hit for two reasons when I bought properties. One of them was the excitement of the deal, especially when we got into exchanging one for another. I really liked the creativity of that. And the other thing has been lifelong. I just like fixing things.
Yeah.
So as he would say, I turned junk into real estate. So we would buy houses that nobody else wanted, and we would fix them, or apartment buildings, and we would fix them. So that was a big part of it for me too.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit more about that, the aspect of, and I'm hearing you on the dopamine hits or whatever, and I want to talk a little bit more about the anti-dopamine hits, which is the how do you plan for retirement, and move into that, and particularly if you're on a really tight budget, which many people are. And one of the strategies is to actually make it so that you have to engage with the withdrawal as infrequently as possible. So if you can set up an automatic withdrawal that comes, like out of a paycheck, for example, that goes into a matching fund. First of all, that's really good money because you get matched. So it's a great investment, but also you never see it. It doesn't even arrive in your bank account because it's taken out ahead of time. That's a good example of one good way to plan for the future, because it's not, you don't have to have the negative experience of letting go of it or putting it aside or ignoring it or giving up a reward. You just never see it. So the fewer times that you can interact and get a steady thing, then the better off you are for that kind of thing. In terms of the planning, what I hear is a lot of people who are really kind of frantic about the fact that they don't have retirement savings set up. And you do want to make it part of your budget. And budgeting is another issue. Obviously, sticking to a budget, particularly if impulsivity is part of your ADHD. But it is really important. Now, I see somebody's asking a question, which is what happens if you don't have a steady paycheck? And I think that's the answer to that is an answer of degrees. If you don't have a steady paycheck, but you're getting enough money to put food on your table and pay your rent and get all of the basic expenses, the very first thing you want to do is, if you have credit card debt, get rid of it. Switch it over to a 0%. Pay as much of it down as you can, because you can't save enough for retirement to compensate for the 20% interest on your credit card. So that's your very first thing. Focus on getting your credit card debt down and having zero credit card debt, or as close to zero as you can. And then at that point, set yourself a monthly budget, if that's how it works for you, or a quarterly budget where you say, okay, I'm going to try very hard to put this aside. Part of it is, how rewarding can you make it feel? So even something as basic as putting a mood board up somewhere, like in your office or something, that shows the Bahamas that you want to go visit, or the whatever, however you're envisioning your retirement, or maybe it's you want to be paying for kids' education or something, so you get pictures of your kids or whatever, something visually to remind you that this is actually the reward that I'm going to get, to help it feel better when you do it, and some kind of a monitoring, if you can do that. The problem comes when the other partner is monitoring or overseeing, and it becomes a huge argument. I don't know, Rick, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm going to go back just a little bit. I believe our powers of rationalization are so overwhelming. I mean, someone told me a long time ago that the for the average person, the biggest asset they have when they retire is their house. And my immediate thought was, well, geez, I'll just buy
Let's have
two
10.
houses. I'll buy two houses. I mean, I don't need to save money. I'll just have another house. Why not? So that's a huge power of rationalization.
Yeah.
Plus, I was dealing in an area of, 10, 12% inflation, and I couldn't rationalize sticking money away that was just going to be basically getting eroded. But yeah, I am divorced, and I don't think the issues were really driven mostly by money. It was by other things.
Yeah.
But I got to give my ex-wife credit. She handled some really steep roller coaster rides with us, and we moved something like 18 times. And
Yeah.
half the time it was us wanting to do it, and other times we had to do it. And our last meltdown was basically everything disappeared. And it was all because I kept building vertically, and I didn't step out of my little rationalization bubble to get outside help. It just didn't occur to me. I didn't want to hear what other, more rational people had to tell me. I had an accountant. I didn't want to listen to them.
So this is one of the issues when you're in a partnership, in a marriage or a partnership or whatever it is. If your partner is really truly distressed by what's going on, and I know you said that sometimes your partner wasn't fully aware of it, but certainly when your house is being taken away from you and et cetera, they're aware of it. And lots of times they are. If your partner is really truly distressed about finances is one of those big topics in marriage where distress in that arena is likely to cause a much larger ripple across the relationship. The person won't feel safe with the lack of financial stability, or they won't feel they'll feel resentful that you're quote unquote not taking more care, or however it shows up. So if you are in a situation where your partner is essentially, livid about how the finances are going, you need to stop, and you need to get a third party to intervene for you, if at all possible. That might mean that you go talk to some kind of a perhaps inexpensive financial planner, or you do some reading of books or whatever. That's probably not as good, but somebody, a marriage counselor, if you're seeing a counselor already, who can say, okay, wait, let's stop and let's take a look at this more carefully, because otherwise it's going to pull down your relationship as well. And that, that's a huge cost. It isn't financial, but it could be if you get divorced, but it is a huge, huge cost. Yeah, Rick.
Yeah, we'll say two different types of partners, I guess, but my romantic partner, my wife, was fully informed. She knew everything we were doing, and there was no secrets there. And I'm amazed looking back, how well she handled the stress, because it was pretty stressful. It was my business partner in a sense, and I never lied to him. I just was really good at spinning the story to make it sound really good, which is what I really believed. And I was his cash cow, right? So he was putting in small amounts of money, and we were doing all kinds of things. So we both had our reasons for that. But if I had sought outside, completely independent advice, I'm pretty sure people would have said, hey, this is a 911. You need to get a handle on this before it all falls apart.
Yeah. And you would have been better for it.
Oh, right? Absolutely.
So, you perhaps would have been a mogul by now, doing exactly what you were doing, because it sounds like you had some good ideas.
I don't even want to tell you what that property was. Those properties were worth, but yeah, it all went away. In fact, I was left the non-dischargeable debt at the end of it. It was awful.
Yeah. It sounds awful. So I want to talk, I want to shift the conversation a little bit to cover-ups and lying. You were talking about sort of spinning the story so that the full picture wasn't, and part of that's because you believed the spin. But I also see a lot of just outright lying. And particularly when the situation becomes really nasty around money, where one partner has said, look, the only way that we are going to be able to survive is if I impose a budget on you. You get to spend $700 a month, and that's it. And you want to buy something, you can't buy it. That's too bad, whatever it is. And the other partner essentially goes into what I call you're not the boss of me mode. And sort of does what they want to do and justifies it by saying my partner's being too controlling, this isn't fair, etc. And I have seen huge debts rolled up in this kind of a situation. One couple where a partner with ADHD ran up $75,000 on credit cards. The wife's family bailed them out with the promise that that wouldn't happen again, and immediately happened again.
Right.
And that there's, I'm sure there's I suspect part of that is addiction. And part of that is sort of the underlying health of both the individual and also of the relationship. And that puts the other partner into a really, really tough spot, because at some point they have to say, you know what, this financial lying is so, I'm not in a trustworthy place anymore. But some of that comes from what I call parent-child dynamics, where one partner becomes, the non-ADD partner becomes kind of a manager person in the relationship. You're not paying attention to this, so I must. And they do, but they sort of take it over, and then they dictate what is supposed to happen to the other partner, who's playing kind of a childlike, less responsible role. And sometimes really gloms onto that role, like, okay, well, if you're going to treat me like a child, I'm just going to do what I want, kind of thing. So that is a really poisonous dynamic. It doesn't just hit the financial side of things; it hits the entire relationship, and it is actually one of the singly most common dynamics that I see in couples impacted by ADHD. It's the very first thing you need to work on if you go start working with a counselor who understands ADHD. But it can really get in the way when you start thinking about things like planning for retirement, to go back to that one, because the parental partner is saying, we have to plan for retirement, and the other partner is saying, you're always trying to control me. I don't want to be controlled. So no, I'm not going to do that. I want to go buy a boat or whatever. That's a real example from a couple that I was talking to not too long ago. And so it can be a very, very difficult thing. And the question is, what do you do about that lying and that rebellion? And the answer starts with, but does not finish with, getting rid of or diminishing dramatically the parent-child dynamic. Right? If you have a lot of lying and cover-ups, it means that there's a partner who's hiding things, sometimes because of shame, sometimes because they don't want to have to report back to a parent figure in that parent-child dynamic, sometimes because they're impulsive and they're embarrassed about it or whatever. But the parent-child dynamic is a huge issue. So while you'd like to start with the financial stuff, and I'm not saying don't do anything on the financial side, certainly if you can sign up for automatic deposit or whatever, you should try to do that. But work with somebody to start to address the parent-child dynamic. It will make everything in the relationship much easier, and certainly the financial conversations much easier as well. Rick, you want to jump in with that? Do you have any thoughts in that arena?
Yeah, I don't relate to the lying part of it, because people have told me I'm actually painfully honest with things. But
Yay.
but there is a flip side to that, in that my ex-wife had so much confidence in what I was doing, even though I was telling her how close to the edge we were. And when I look back on it, I say, oh my gosh, how did you do that? You weren't even on the edge, you were beyond that. So I never really got the kind of feedback that might have helped me from her, because she felt safe. She felt everything is kind of, even though we had a couple of times when things didn't go right, she always figured I would figure it out. And I figured that too. And so I kind of didn't get that stress relief in a way. I guess I'd go back to that. There were times when I felt really, really anxious about things, because I could see how if I just didn't get the next couple of things right, things would start falling apart in a cascade, right? Things that you can't handle. So yeah, I think sometimes the partner, the adult child, the child that you're talking about, actually needs to step up in order to help the other person step down and have an even relationship. So
yeah, well, for sure, they do need to step up. That's part of it. I mean, the way that at the 30,000-foot level, the way that you get out of the parent-child dynamic is the person who's doing the parenting stops deciding that the only way to manage in the relationship is to essentially manage everything, including the other partner. And that's a very difficult transition lots of times. And it is done in tandem with the ADHD partner stepping up, managing the ADHD better, learning better communication skills sometimes, whatever is going on, so that they become more even in their status in their relationship, and hopefully are able to then have less toxic interactions. So somebody else had said they didn't feel that the lying was an issue, which is great. That's really super for you, because it does come up quite a bit, but obviously not for every couple. So, and it varies. I mean, I gave an extreme example, but there's also there are the little things like, why did you buy something, or I didn't, or whatever. Yeah.
I can actually give you another extreme example, because these things happen. Back in my early real estate days, there were a lot of other brokers and agents out there, and one of them was so far behind them and didn't tell anybody anything, and the house actually went through a foreclosure. He hid all of the documents and everything, and the sheriff actually knocked on the door, whatever they do for an eviction, because if you don't move out after foreclosure, they have to be evicted. And the man had hidden everything. She literally passed out. When they announced, she opened the door, found out from the sheriff they didn't own their house anymore, and they had to be out right then.
Yeah.
So yeah, these things can get really bad. I don't know if that had anything to do with ADHD, but certainly was a character flaw.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think the some of the things like sitting down and doing budgets. I mean, of course, we all have to make really tough decisions in terms of what is it that we will spend money on, what are we saving for, when do we repair the car, will it last, all that stuff. So these are not easy things to discuss even in normal circumstances without having any other issues that you might be facing as a couple.
Yep.
So another area that to be thinking about is employment issues. Now, there's been research on employment status, and people with ADHD have the same level of employment as people without ADHD. However, they are more likely to have had certain kinds of experiences in their employment, such as getting fired, being put on disciplinary action, not getting along with their coworkers. They'll typically have more jobs, or sometimes be unemployed for more time. It's not that unusual where I hear somebody say, wow, in the last 6 years, my partner has had 5 jobs or something like that. I hear that with some consistency. That also can put a lot of stress on a relationship. And there, again, along the lines of delegating, it depends on what your issue is. But if, for example, you get fired and you're having difficulty putting together a resume and starting a job search, which I see regularly, because talk about things that don't feel rewarding, going and putting yourself in front of people and then getting rejected repeatedly. Or getting organized enough to actually do that resume after 5 years of not having updated it, are not very fun things to contemplate. There are coaches who can help people. And in fact, Rick, you may have some of them, I'm not sure, that are affiliated with you guys that can help people pull together a job search.
Definitely.
Yeah. And that's a good strategy, to not just assume you have to do it yourself. I mean, one of the things to think about is doing it the way that is friendly for somebody who has ADHD is a lot faster, a lot more efficient than trying to do it the way that's not friendly. like for example, if you have organizational skill issues, just trying to organize it yourself versus getting somebody who's a whiz at organizing. It'll take you 3 times as long or longer, and you may just get completely overwhelmed. So,
my dad came from the generation that if you want it done right, you do it yourself. But the world is far more complicated than that now. And for a lot of these things, if you want it done right, you hire someone who knows how to do it. So I think that's a really good thing to embrace.
And not only that, but then lots of times they'll do a much better job,
of course,
than you would have done, because they know how to do it and they see it all the time, which is actually really exciting. So what you're doing is you're changing from doing it yourself to making a really good decision to give it to somebody else to do. It's a really good investment in terms of time and energy. I mean, one of the things to think about is overwhelm. And I run into a lot of people who are doing job searches who have ADHD, who really are just really overwhelmed by the whole thing. Occasionally they'll come to me and say, okay, so wait, hold on, what's the next step? You know, and I'll give them the next step, and then they'll go off and do it again. But it can be really challenging. Um, so those kinds of things are a big deal. One of the things I think would be good, Rick, is, are there topics in this arena, in terms of financial, lessening financial distress? Because I can go on more if you want, but are there specific topics you want to cover here?
Well, I'm very interested in the couples aspect of it because I think we're a little bit light on that at Rena-Fi. I totally buy into what you said about the automation. I mean, nobody should be putting a stamp on a check and sending it out. These days, all your bills should be paid automatically, and your income can be partitioned automatically as well, which we talk about paying yourself first. Take whatever percentage you want to put it in your savings account and put it there. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's all kinds of, that's all we do at Rena-Fi is talk about money issues and how they're impacted by the emotional issues of ADHD.
Yeah, and then made more complicated by the emotional issues of the partner who's contemplating the emotional issues of the person with ADHD. And there's a ton of stress there.
Nothing happens in a vacuum. Yeah, we
Yeah.
have a social matrix around us, and yeah, it impacts us.
Well, so I'm just going to go through a few cases, I guess, if you want to think of it that way. Maybe that's too big a word. Of things that people that I have worked with who've had really big issues. One is around budgeting. A couple who the non-ADD partner was very willing to put together a best shot at a budget, and then wanted to bring it to the other partner, and the ADHD partner was just saying, I can't deal with this, I can't deal with this. And she got very, very frustrated and just was like, okay, so how do we get this to go? And one of the issues that they were facing was that she was bringing it to him spontaneously, and he wasn't ready for it. So if you think about having sort of a preamble, like, okay, I know this isn't going to be fun, but it's only going to be 25 minutes, right? That's it. We're going to limit it. We're going to set an alarm. We're going to do 25 minutes really efficiently and talk about this. That is one way to get around that, is to actually like have this preamble, sort of do the deep breathing ahead of time, go, okay, I can do it for 25 minutes. Rick, you had something you were going to say.
Yeah, and I think you practically answered it, but I think it's really important for couples to do things together. You can't just do something 100% and then hand it to them and say, this is the way it's going to be. No. You need to get their buy-in. And I myself, it took me a long time to learn this, but because we don't like to ask for help, even though that's sometimes our biggest strength, it really works when you go to your partner or whoever it is and say, I need your help with this, right? Yeah. Whether you need their help or not, what you need is for them to interact with you. And if you say, I need your help, they're going to sit down with you and work on it. Yeah. And then, of course, you have to be open to the input, to the input that might not agree with what you had preconditioned, but you just have to do it together. And the earlier you start being together, the better.
And I agree with that. And in fact, I was thinking of, putting together a budget as sort of the first draft is how I was thinking of it, but it maybe didn't come across that way. And maybe you don't even want to do that. Maybe it's a idea session first and then a draft and then but put it into small chunks so that it's not like going into the dental chair and having your teeth pulled. It becomes something that's not as stressful, and try to take the symbolic parts of it out. There's fear, and one of the biggest fears for non-ADHD partners actually is, we're not actually going to be able to do this. My partner's not actually going to engage around this, or it's going to be really a negative experience because he or she's going to get angry or whatever. Try really hard to check those kinds of emotions at the door and stay on the actual physical task of the monetary side of things. How would this work? Is this the right set of assumptions, etc.?
Yeah, I think what really helps the non-ADHD partner is to have the ADHD person stop saying it's because of my ADHD. When the non-ADHD partner sees the ADHD partner working on things and actually struggling and making some progress, even though it's small, they're going to get a lot more traction with that. But I've seen, because I've led chat groups for 20 years now, and lots of times people come in and they're like in this victim mentality. Well, oh, it's my ADHD. Of course I can't get here on time. Of course I can't manage money. Well, that's going to scare your partner to death, right?
Yeah.
But if you say, hey, I have difficulty and here's what I'm doing about it,
So the difference between those two mindsets is a difference of engagement. And for the non-ADHD or other ADHD partner, because you could have two people with ADHD in a couple, engagement is the key. It isn't success that is as important. What's important is it's that the partner is willing to get involved and start and take responsibility for it. Right. And once you see that going on in your ADHD partner, then you give them a lot more leeway. If they're not engaged, like as you described, then you just want to like pull them to, you gotta get engaged, and that's when everything falls apart. Yep. So that's for sure an issue.
Yeah, I would actually say one more thing about that. I think the non-ADHD partner has to be cognizant that a lot of people with ADHD are oppositional, and they got that way in grammar school, but they get triggered by these things. Yeah. So we have to be very careful not to be telling them. They work much better with cheerleaders than drill sergeants, right?
Yeah, and the more you tell them, the more they
pull back,
push you away and back up, or get defensive, or get angry, or whatever.
Yeah.
So another case study, just to sort of give you as many examples, because I don't know what the backgrounds are for folks here. A man who was a principal at a school and got fired because he was very good at his job, didn't like doing the paperwork, took another job as a principal at a different school, got fired a second time for the exact same reason. And sadly, he also got fired a third time for the same reason, at which point he's like, okay, the ADHD is definitely getting in the way here, and went and got a coach. If you get regular feedback in your job, which says, hey, you're struggling with X, Y, or Z, get a coach. There are coaches that specialize in working with people on financial issues and in job issues and et cetera. And this is something that you guys work with a lot, Rick. But try to take it on board. It's scary, but this person ended up actually pretending to go to work after the third firing because he was so embarrassed that it had happened to him multiple times. And his wife still found out that he was out of a job, and that was just a horrible experience for both of them. Your heart goes out to him, but a coach could have helped him create those specific skills that he needed, and the organizational system he needed, and the motivation. And I don't use motivation lightly. It's like, as in, how the heck do I get myself to do this thing which feels so bad and so unimportant to me or disinteresting?
Right.
So
that's actually a kind of a trigger word for me in a little bit, in a lightweight way. But a lot of times ADHD looks like the person is not motivated, and in actual fact, internally they're extremely motivated. There's just this glass wall they can't seem to get through. And when the non-ADHD partner says, well, if you really cared about me, you would do it, or if you really wanted it, you would do it, that just pushes the person in the wrong direction.
It does, and that's why I brought that word out. It is a very tricky word. I always am telling people, the folks that I know that I talk with in depth about their ADHD are some of the hardest working, hardest trying people I've ever met. Okay. It's the opposite of not being motivated. They're highly motivated, and to your point, they're stuck. What I was using the word for was, how do I get around that glass wall? Right? He was told multiple times in multiple job situations that he had a skill set issue. And still was having difficulty probably for reasons of shame, and maybe also for reasons of he knew how good he was at all the other parts of the job, and this part was just like, that he couldn't bring himself to face it. If you find yourself in that kind of situation, as hard as it may be, his number one cheerleader was his wife in this case. And if he had been able to go to her and said, look, this is starting to happen, then she would have fully supported his going to get a coach and getting the skill set in there, so that it didn't, for him, it wasn't motivation so much as finding a way to make it palatable. That's really what I'm talking about in that situation. So, yeah, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I saw Elizabeth put in there how to get around the wall. I think there's a number of things, but that is it's a big issue. In the case of the principal, I mean, I'm just thinking the job was too big, right? He was really good at part of it and not good at another. And if they had just brought in an administrative assistant to do all that paperwork, that school would have been better off. So I think for a lot of us, we have to realize we have strengths and weaknesses. And if we shore up our strengths and make them good enough, they can actually pay for the assistant that takes care of the weakness, right? If we try to improve our weaknesses, which is a good thing, we don't make nearly as much progress as if we get twice as good at something we're already good at. And
Right.
so at least in business and as an entrepreneur, which a lot of people with ADHD are, do what you do best and hire out the part that you don't. You know, if you need a bookkeeper, get a bookkeeper. They're not that expensive compared to, like you said, you know, not having one.
Yeah.
Not having one's far more expensive.
Yeah. And that sort of brings, so one of the common financial issues at home is paying bills. And we talked about, putting it all on auto pay. Not everything can go on auto pay for a variety of reasons. And there are things like scheduling teachers' meetings and things like that, which are one-offs or whatever. And there's this interesting sort of conundrum that couples face quite a bit, which has to do with what I call the chore wars, but it's, who's doing what tasks, essentially, and how you transition into those. And one of the things that needs to, so the basic way of changing how you do tasks in a household to become more successful is that you figure out, you have several different approaches that you layer on top of each other. One is figure out what each partner's strengths are. So Rick, to what you were talking about with this guy with his job, he had some very significant strengths and some significant weaknesses. So figure out what each partner's strengths are and try to align the responsibilities that each partner has with their strengths first and foremost. That's one strategy. Another has to do with silos, putting things in silos where you're completely responsible for one thing and you don't have to worry about the other partner's input particularly. I mean, like there might be a grocery list, but then only one person goes to the grocery store or whatever. So that's another strategy. Another strategy is to moderate the areas where there is less strength, but which are necessary. And sometimes that's around ADHD symptoms, sometimes it's around other things, and build that skill set with a coach or whatever. So when people start, and then setting up a regular chore or task meeting or some way to coordinate rather than have a manager dictating to a slave, essentially, right? So there are lots of different things that you do to try to make the family responsibilities run more smoothly, including the financial responsibilities. One of the things that I see happen is one of the first things that people want to do is like, okay, so I'll pay the bills. And the other partner says, okay, fine. You know what? I'm not supposed to manage so much. So go ahead. You can pay the bills. But that core skill set of reminding yourself when to pay the bills, or getting it set up or staying organized or not losing the bills or whatever the issues might be, hasn't yet been set up. So as you think about setting up new financial routines in the family, think about transitioning. If the non-ADHD partner has been managing a certain routine and you want to change that, think about transitioning where you're sort of evaluating what's the skill set that needs to happen. Do we have enough, how do the bills come into the house? Do we capture them all in one place? And can we, could we put them in a basket where you can just toss them in the basket? You don't have to even think about it until you go to pay them or whatever the thing is. And make it a transition rather than an abdication. If one person says, fine, you just go pay the bills, and the other person hasn't set up their skill set yet to do it, it doesn't work very well. And you fall into, you're essentially setting up the ADHD partner to fail. And you don't want to do that. You want to do the opposite. So that's one of the issues around financial changes, any changes, but particularly financial changes, which are often so important. Make sure that the underpinning or the girding or the support structure is adequately put in place in order to pass off that responsibility.
Mhm.
So,
One thing I thought about while you were talking, I think it's really important for couples and businesses, whatever, when there's more than one person, to just have one calendar. I mean, you can have multiple calendars that populate onto one screen, but you really, everything should be on one calendar. If you've got a PTA meeting or something like that to go to, both partners should be able to see it at any point. It's just, oh, that's what we're doing.
yep.
If you have more than one, if someone's got a little notebook that they're writing things in, the other person doesn't know that, they're clueless, and then they're blindsided, and then you have more problems.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And there are lots of calendars that do that. I know I use the Google Calendar, and it totally, you can show multiple ones, turn them on and off, whatever.
Yep.
Yeah, so that, I mean, that's right. And that's part of the coordination. And the same thing, for on the financial side of things, if you've got a big expense coming up, how do you tell your partner about that? Or how do you discuss it? Or when do you discuss it? Or whatever. There's another layer of coordination there. So, as painful as it is sometimes, I've seen a lot of couples do quite well by having some kind of a regular check-in with each other, in part because it does imply a more equal status. If you are actually genuinely checking in with each other about what each person is doing and what your priorities are, and et cetera, that's useful.
Actually, I think it's one of the biggest things, because I see a lot of ADHD partnerships where one person, in the beginning, somebody's got a lot of stability and they're looking for some excitement in their life, and the person with a lot of excitement is looking for a little stability. So I see how those things happen in some sense. But if you don't collaborate and do things together, it ends up being a parent-child relationship, and then that sets all kinds of resentments and all kinds of other things in motion. And by the time it kind of reaches the boiling point, you've got years down the road, years of baggage that's really
Yeah.
hard to unpack. So
Yeah.
I think doing things together, even if there's a little friction there, is pretty important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm wondering if we should take some questions, that if there are questions or other issues. Rick, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah. Anybody in the room wants to either type into the chat. I've been kind of watching that. Elizabeth and Stephen have been chiming in. Or you can raise your hand and I can unmute your mic. I'm happy to do that. We've got maybe 7 minutes left, 6 minutes. There we go. Let me see how to do this. Allow to talk. RK. No, it's Raghu. Hello.
I'm not hearing any. I'm not hearing a question. Are you unmute? Can he unmute himself?
I don't see that he's muted, but yeah, no, he's not muted.
Okay.
Can you speak, Raghu?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, awesome. All right. This is a very helpful session. So the question that I have is on the same lines about monthly budgeting and then handling any upcoming expenses, like planning a holiday, or we have to actually fix something in the car. So what I've noticed is, especially some of these conversations, we start off with the idea of, okay, so this is the issue, this is what we want to tackle. But then it kind of goes into a mode of, back and forth blame rather than really addressing the problem. So how to navigate such, tricky conversations?
Yeah. So I was talking before about the emotions versus the sort of meat and potatoes, if you want to call it, of the specific financial issue. One way to do that is to say, look, we have a lot of emotional issues around money or in the relationship or whatever, but we also have a very specific financial issue that we need to address immediately. So can we separate them out? Actually talk about that ahead of time, and see if you can separate it out. It would depend on the issue, because some of it is going to be, well, you don't want to save for this. This means you don't care about my priorities, and, et cetera. So that they're pretty tightly intertwined, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes it's just that somebody is really feeling resentful or angry or whatever, and it's just spilling out everywhere. And so you may be able to actually name it, name the fact that there are these emotional things getting in the way or not. And certainly if you've had one of those conversations, go back and say, hey, the emotional content there really got in the way of our solving the problem. Another way to maybe do it is to write down options, because writing something down makes it less emotional. And so then you can go back to the list of things, the ideas that you've had, or the strategies you might want to consider, and that may help take out some of the emotion.
And I see one more question from Elizabeth. You got your hand up, and I think
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, it's actually Steven's here.
Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep. Can't see you yet, but yes, we hear
Yes.
you.
I just really felt like you hit the nail on the head for us with the whole parent-child dynamic. It's something we probably have been laboring under for more than a decade. So I know we're only got minutes left, but anything you could say about, what are the first and step number one and step number two? I know you said about the person who's in the parent role stopping, taking care of everything, and the other person stepping up. But anything more specific than that?
Well, so that's the 30,000-foot view, but it's very much more complicated than that. So I've written quite a lot about this topic, actually. So I would send you to my two books. The first one is called The ADHD Effect on Marriage, and that one gives an overview of not just parent-child dynamics, but a lot of other things. The second one is called The Couple's Guide to Thriving with ADHD, and that one takes specific emotional issues, and parent-child is definitely one of them, and there's an entire chapter just on parent-child dynamics, what's going on, why it's going on, the strategies that you use to go through getting it. So I would send you to those two resources, as well as I give a couple seminar. Same thing, I talk quite a bit about parent-child because, as I said, it's really pervasive. So lots and lots of people have that issue.
Well, actually, we just have a minute or two. Do you want to, Melissa, tell them how to contact you and
Okay.
all that?
And I will repeat those titles. So my website is adhdmarriage.com, and you can find a lot of information there. The books are The ADHD Effect on Marriage and The Couple's Guide to Thriving with ADHD. That information is also on my website. You can find them anywhere online. And they also have audiobooks and stuff. And I do give an 8-week couples seminar that is a very good resource for folks. So I'm happy to answer questions. There are lots of different ways to contact me, so feel free to reach out.